If you had asked me 5 years ago to define the word family, I would have given you the standard, naive answer. I would have told you it meant unconditional love, a safety net that never breaks, and a loyalty that runs deeper than any contract. I am 36 years old now, and the man who believed those things feels like a stranger, a ghost from a different lifetime. My name is Elias, and if you had told that younger version of me that I would eventually be the one to sever the financial lifeline to my own parents, watching their comfortable world crumble by my own design, I would have called you a liar. But innocence is a luxury that dies the moment you see the people you love turn their cruelty toward your child. The death of my old life didn't happen in a war zone or a courtroom. It happened in a brightly lit play cafe on a Saturday afternoon, amidst the smell of sugar and the sound of children's laughter. My daughter, Maya, had just turned 7. To describe Maya is to describe sunlight breaking through a cloud. She is empathy personified, the kind of child who shares her lunch without being asked and worries if the stray cat outside is cold. I am her father, so my bias is expected, but the teachers and other parents saw it too. She was a soul made of soft edges in a world that is often too sharp. For her birthday, I wanted everything to be perfect. We hadn't rented a ballroom, just a modest, colorful space with pastel balloons and a cake she had chosen herself, a vanilla sponge topped with edible butterflies. She was wearing a dress she had coveted for months, a shimmering violet gown that made her feel like royalty. I remember watching her spin in front of the mirror that morning, her eyes wide with the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that adults spend their whole lives trying to recapture. I held on to a fragile hope that day. I hoped that my parents, my brother Julian, and my sister Elena would finally see her. I hoped that for once the hierarchy of the family would dissolve, and they would treat Maya with the same adoration they lavished on my siblings' children. When they arrived, the atmosphere shifted instantly. They walked in like a storm front, my brother and sister trailing behind my parents, their arms laden with glossy gift bags and boxes wrapped in expensive, shimmering paper. For a heartbeat, my chest swelled. I thought, finally. I thought they had made an effort. I watched as my father, a man who prided himself on being the patriarch, began to distribute the envelopes. They were thick, creamy linen envelopes, the kind that whisper of money. He handed them out to Julian's sons, then to Elena's daughters.
I watched my nieces and nephews tear them open, gasping as they pulled out crisp $100 bills and brand new high-end tablets, the plastic wrap glinting under the cafe lights. The room filled with the sounds of tearing paper and avaricious cheers. My sister clapped her hands, beaming as if her children had achieved some great feat by simply existing. My brother ruffled his son's hair, making a loud joke about how they were now the kings of the playground. And then the room seemed to quiet down as my father turned toward Maya. She was standing there, her hands clasped in front of her violet dress, a small, hopeful smile trembling on her lips. She stepped forward, ready to receive her share of the grandfatherly affection. My father didn't reach for a bag. He didn't reach for an envelope. He simply looked at her, and then a smirk, a cold, dismissive curling of the lip, broke across his face. He spoke loud enough for the silence to catch every syllable. "She doesn't really count as part of the legacy, does she?" The air left the room. It felt as though gravity had suddenly doubled, pinning me to the floor. I heard the blood rushing in my ears, a roar like the ocean. Maya's smile didn't disappear immediately. It faltered, confused, as she looked from her grandfather to me, searching for a translation of a language she didn't speak, the language of cruelty. My mother, the woman who claimed to be the peacemaker, simply looked away, studying the wall as if a sudden fascination with the paint would absolve her of the moment. My siblings said nothing. Their children continued to play with their expensive gadgets, oblivious, while my daughter stood there, the sparkle of her dress suddenly looking tragically out of place. "Dad?" Maya whispered, the sound barely audible. "Did I do something bad?" That question shattered me. It broke the paralysis. The anger that rose in my throat tasted like bile and copper. But I knew that if I unleashed it there, if I screamed and raged, I would only frighten her more. I dropped to one knee, ignoring the burning stares of my family, and took Maya's cold hands in mine. I looked her in the eye and told her the only truth that mattered. No, baby, you are perfect. You did nothing wrong. I stood up, lifted her into my arms, and without saying a word to the people who shared my DNA, I walked out. I walked past my father's smug satisfaction, past my mother's cowardice, and into the cool air of the parking lot. The drive home was a blur of gray asphalt and silence. Maya sat in the back, staring out the window, the box containing her untouched birthday cake sitting on the seat beside her like a coffin. I kept replaying the scene, my father's casual dismissal, the way my family had accepted her exclusion as natural.
And then the realization hit me. It wasn't a slow dawn, it was a lightning strike. I had been financing their arrogance. For years, I had been the silent architect of their lifestyle. My parents' mortgage? I paid it. The luxury SUV my mother drove to her book clubs? The lease was in my name. Their credit cards, which they treated like bottomless wells? I covered the minimums and the overages, always telling myself that it was just a rough patch, that families help each other. I had been paying for the very shoes they stood in while they trampled on my daughter's heart. That night, after I finally soothed Maya to sleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight to her chest, I didn't go to bed. I sat at my kitchen table, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the darkness. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I was possessed by a cold, clinical rage. I pulled up every spreadsheet, every bank login, every automatic transfer. I traced the flow of money that bled from my accounts into theirs. And one by one, with the methodical precision of a surgeon, I severed the connections. I canceled the direct debits. I froze the credit cards. I logged into the leasing portal and terminated the agreement on the SUV. I stopped the mortgage transfer. I didn't send a warning text. I didn't ask for an explanation. They had shown me exactly what my daughter was worth to them. Nothing. Now, I was going to show them what they were worth to me. The silence of the night was heavy, but for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of obligation pressing on my chest. The chaos began at 7 a.m. My phone, usually quiet on a Sunday, began to buzz against the nightstand like an angry hornet. At first, I ignored it, focusing on making pancakes for Maya, trying to normalize a world that had tilted on its axis. But the buzzing didn't stop. I glanced at the screen. Mom, Dad, Mom, Julian, Elena, Mom. I picked it up eventually, not to answer, but to read the scrolling preview of panic. The card was declined at the gas station. Fix it. Mike, the mortgage company sent an alert. What did you do? Why isn't the car starting? The remote ignition is locked. It was surreal. For a decade, I had been the fixer, the safety net they bounced on without ever looking down to see who was holding the ropes. They had mistaken my generosity for a love of physics, something that would simply always exist. Now, gravity had returned. I silenced the phone and turned back to Maya. She was pushing cereal around her bowl, her eyes downcast. Daddy, she asked, her voice small, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me? I reached across the table and brushed a stray curl from her forehead. No, Maya. They are just learning that actions have consequences.
But that is grown-up business. You are the best thing in my life. Never forget that. I dropped her off at school, and by the time I parked at my office, my phone was a digital war zone. My father had finally deigned to text me directly. His message was short, sharp, and commanded obedience. Call me now. You don't get to play games with our livelihood. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Our livelihood, as if he had earned a dime of it in the last 10 years. I went to work. I focused on my clients, on the consulting firm I had built from the ground up, a success I had largely kept hidden from them to avoid even more requests for money. By noon, my brother Julian called. I answered, putting him on speaker while I reviewed a contract. "What the hell did you do, Elias?" he snapped. I could hear the stress in his voice, the sound of a man whose free ride had just hit a wall. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice steady. "Don't play dumb," Julian spat. "Mom is crying, Dad is furious, the cards are dead, the SUV is locked. You can't just pull the rug out. They depend on you. We depend on you." I leaned back in my leather chair. Funny, I said. Yesterday, Dad was very clear about who counts as family. If Maya isn't family, then surely I'm just a distant relative, and distant relatives don't pay mortgages. You're punishing them for a joke? Julian yelled. He was joking. Don't drag your kid into this. I didn't drag her into it, I replied, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. He did. He made a 7-year-old feel invisible in front of a room full of people, and you all laughed. You stood there and laughed. So now you can deal with the fallout. If you're such a tight-knit family, you pay their bills. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, my mother appeared on my porch. She didn't knock, she stood there wringing her hands, performing the role of the victim perfectly. When I opened the door, she tried to push past me, but I blocked the threshold. "Elias," she breathed, her eyes wide and wet with manipulative tears. "You can't do this. Your father is humiliated. The card declined at the grocery store. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" "Not nearly as embarrassing as telling a child she doesn't matter," I said. "He didn't mean it," she cried. "You know how he is. He's old school. He speaks without thinking. It was a slip." "It was a dagger," I corrected her, "and you watched him twist it." She stiffened, her face hardening. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. When you became successful, it was your turn. That is how families work." "No, that is how parasites work. I am done, Mom."
The bank of Elias is closed. "If you do this," she hissed, the mask of the grieving mother slipping to reveal the anger underneath, "we will lose the house. The neighbors will talk. Do you want that on your conscience?" "I sleep just fine," I said, and I closed the door in her face. I thought that would be the end of the initial shock, but I underestimated their spite. The family group chat, which I had muted but not left, exploded. My sister Elena posted a photo of her daughters holding up their new iPads with the caption, "At least some of us appreciate what we're given. Too bad others are too sensitive to take a joke." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. They were not sorry. They were escalating. They were trying to bully me back into submission. The true breaking point, the moment that turned my passive withdrawal into active warfare, came 2 weeks later. Maya had a violin recital. She had been practicing for months, filling our home with screeching scales that slowly, painfully smoothed out into a melody. She was terrified of performing, but I had promised her I would be there, front row. When we arrived at the school auditorium, the air was thick with the smell of floor wax and nervous sweat. I saw them walk in. My parents, Julian, Elena. They sat in the back, loud and boisterous, greeting other parents, pretending nothing was wrong. I was surprised they had come, thinking perhaps this was an olive branch. I was wrong. When Maya's group walked onto the stage, she looked small and fragile holding her instrument. She scanned the crowd, found me, and gave a tiny, brave wave. I waved back. Then her eyes drifted to the back of the room. I saw the moment she saw them. My father leaned over to Julian, whispered something, and then as the room went silent for the performance to begin, he cupped his hands around his mouth. Loudly, cruelly, he shouted, "Hope it doesn't sound like a dying cat this time." The laughter from their corner was sharp and jagged. It sliced through the auditorium. Maya froze. Her bow trembled in her hand. She tried to play, but the first note came out as a harsh squeak. The laughter from the back renewed. She crumbled. She squeaked again, tears spilling down her cheeks, and then she simply stopped, lowering the violin, her chin quivering as she tried to hold back sobs in front of 200 people. I wanted to burn the building down. I wanted to march to the back of the room and tear them apart. But I couldn't. I had to be the rock. I watched my daughters suffer through the rest of the song, not playing a note, just standing there while the other children played around her. When I took her home, she didn't speak.
She put her violin in the closet and closed the door. "I don't want to play anymore," she whispered. The next morning, her music teacher called me. She told me that after the recital, my father had approached her in the hallway. He had told the teacher that Maya was wasting everyone's time and that she didn't have the talent for this. He suggested the teacher encourage her to quit. That was the moment the last tether snapped. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about protection. They were actively trying to destroy her spirit. I stopped sleeping. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, formulating a plan. I realized that simply cutting them off financially wasn't enough. They were like ivy, choking the life out of everything they touched. I needed to build a wall so high they could never climb it, and I needed to make sure they were too busy surviving their own choices to ever hurt my daughter again. I went to a lawyer. We set up ironclad trusts for Maya, shielding every asset I had. I ensured that if anything happened to me, they wouldn't see a dime. But I didn't stop there. I began to engage with the community in ways I never had before. I doubled down on my business, aggressively expanding. I landed a massive contract with a tech giant that tripled my firm's revenue. I began attending charity galas, shaking hands with the city's power players, the judges, the developers, the bankers. As my influence grew, theirs began to wither. Without my money, the facade of their life cracked. My brother lost his second car. My sister's boutique business, which I had quietly subsidized, folded within a month. Rumors began to circulate. In small towns, the fall of a proud family is a spectator sport. But they were desperate, and desperation makes people stupid. 3 months into the silence, my business partner walked into my office with a strange look on his face. He handed me a file. "This came from the regional bank," he said. "It's a loan application for a line of credit, a big one." I opened the file. There, at the bottom of the page, was my name listed as the guarantor, and next to it was a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. My father had forged my signature. I stared at the document, feeling a cold calm wash over me. This was a felony. This was fraud. He had tried to leverage my credit, my name, to save his sinking ship. "Do we call the police?" my partner asked. I looked at the paper, then out the window at the skyline. "Not yet," I said. "We send this to my lawyer. We hold it. This is the ace of spades." I didn't react immediately. I let the loan application sit in legal purgatory while the bank began its internal investigation. I knew what was coming. I had heard whispers at a fundraising dinner about a new commercial development planned for the district where my parents lived, a rezoning project. It meant property taxes were about to skyrocket. It meant the land values would fluctuate wildly before stabilizing. I used my LLC, an entity with a name that couldn't be traced back to me by a layman, to quietly purchase a vacant lot adjacent to my parents' property. I positioned myself. I waited. The dominoes began to fall in the autumn. The bank's fraud department concluded their investigation into the forged application. They froze my father's accounts. They called him in for questioning. I heard through the grapevine that he had tried to bluster his way out of it, tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. But banks do not deal in feelings. They deal in facts. Then came the repossession. I had finalized the paperwork on the SUV months ago, but the leasing company had a backlog. When they finally acted, it was poetic. A cousin sent me a photo of the tow truck dragging the luxury car out of the grocery store parking lot, my mother standing on the curb, screaming at the driver. The public humiliation they had feared so much was now their daily reality. And yet, I took no joy in it. It felt like watching a controlled demolition, necessary but dusty and loud. The climax arrived on a Tuesday morning. The notice for the tax lien auction on my parents' investment property, a small rental home they had leveraged to the hilt, was published. They had defaulted. The bank was selling it to recoup the losses from the fraudulent loan attempt. I went to the auction. I didn't sit in the back. I stood near the front, wearing a suit, holding a paddle. I didn't bring Maya. This was not a place for children. This was a place for business. I saw my father across the room. He looked 10 years older. His skin was gray, his suit ill-fitting. He was frantically on the phone, likely trying to beg a loan from a distant relative. When he saw me, he froze. He lowered the phone. A look of relief washed over him. He thought I was there to save him. He thought I was there to buy the house back for him, to restore the order of things. The bidding started. It was aggressive. Investors were circling. My father watched me, waiting for me to step in and stop the madness. When the price hit a certain threshold, I raised my paddle. "Sold," the auctioneer shouted. to the gentleman in the navy suit. My father pushed through the crowd toward me, his eyes wide. "Elias," he gasped, gripping my arm. "Thank God. I knew you wouldn't let us lose it. We can work out a payment plan. I can manage the tenants if you just sign the deed over to." I pulled my arm away, dusting off the sleeve of my jacket. I looked him in the eye, the same cold stare he had given my daughter at her birthday party. "I didn't buy it for you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the room. "I bought it for the portfolio. It's a good investment. The tenants will be evicted next month to make way for the renovation." His jaw dropped. You can't. That's our income. That's our retirement." "That," I said, pointing to the paperwork being processed, "is an asset that you forfeited when you tried to steal my identity. Be grateful I didn't press criminal charges for the forgery, Dad. That was my mercy. This is my justice." He staggered back as if I had hit him. "We are your family," he whispered, the entitlement finally replaced by fear. "No," I said. "You were my dependents. Now you are just people I used to know." I turned and walked away to sign the papers. The final meeting happened a week later at the community center. I agreed to meet them one last time, on neutral ground. I brought the deed, and I brought a document my lawyer had drafted. They were all there. Mom, Dad, Julian, Elena. They looked defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, terrified reality. "I have a proposition," I said, laying the papers on the table. "Are you going to give us the house back?" Elena asked, her voice shrill but weak. "No," I said. "The house is mine. The car is gone. The credit cards are canceled. But I am willing to stop the legal pursuit regarding the fraud. I am willing to ensure the bank doesn't file charges that would put Dad in prison." My mother sobbed into a tissue. "What do you want?" "I want you to disappear," I said. "I want you to leave us alone. No calls, no drive-bys, no showing up at Maya's school, no social media post about ungrateful children. You become strangers. If you break this agreement, if you breathe a word of harassment toward me or my daughter, I will hand the evidence of the forgery to the district attorney within the hour." Silence stretched across the room, heavy and final. My father looked at the table, his hands shaking. He knew he had no cards left to play. He nodded, a sharp, jerky motion. "Good," I said. I stood up. "Goodbye." I walked out of that room and I felt lighter than air. The aftermath was slow but steady. My parents sold their main house to downsize. They couldn't afford the taxes or the upkeep without my funding. Julian moved to a different state to escape his debts. Elena went quiet. But the real victory wasn't their downfall, it was Maya's rise. 6 months later, there was another recital. Maya had started playing again, tentatively at first, then with a fierce passion. We sat in the front row, just me and a few friends I had made. Real friends, the kind chosen, not inherited. When Maya walked onto the stage, she didn't look at the back of the room. She looked at me. She placed the violin under her chin, raised her bow, and she played. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. It was the sound of a little girl who knew she was safe. It was the sound of a child who knew she counted. She finished the piece and the note hung in the air, clear and resonant. The applause was genuine this time. She beamed, bowing low, her face glowing in the spotlight. Later that night, as I tucked her in, she looked up at me. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetie?" "I didn't squeak," she said proudly. "You were a symphony," I told her. She closed her eyes, content. "We're a good team, just us." "The best," I whispered. I walked to the window and looked out at the night. I had lost the family I was born into, yes. I had cut away the rot. But as I listened to the steady breathing of my daughter, I realized I hadn't lost a family at all. I had built one, a real one, protected by walls of my own making, founded on love rather than obligation. And for the first time in 36 years, I was free. If this story of betrayal, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Join us for more emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable stories that remind us all what true strength looks like. Don't miss out. Click now.